Hi, everybody. I'm Allison Atkins. I'm the Assistant Director at the Kennebunk Free Library. Thank you all for joining us tonight for the grand finale of our Maine Climate Action Plan series. We've covered a lot of ground in these last 5 sessions. We started with an overview. We've discussed natural and working lands, energy, transportation, buildings and infrastructure, community resilience. If you missed any of these previous programs and want to catch up, the recordings are going to be posted on KFL's YouTube channel. It's accessible from our homepage. And I'll also post a link in the chat. Tonight, our topic is coastal and marine issues. So we do have everyone muted. If you have questions for our presenters, please put them into the chat. For those who are less familiar with Zoom, if you hover over the bottom of the screen, it'll bring up a little menu and the chat button will be right in the middle. So I want to thank the Planeteers for all of the hard work that they've put into this series, and all of the speakers who are here with us tonight. I'm going to turn you over to Tom Berry from the Planeteers.
Thank you, Allison. For anyone who might not know who we are, the Planeteers of Southern Maine is a grassroots group here in Kennebunk, and we promote sustainable living in ecological balance with the other species that live on this planet with us. And we strive to bring attention to a range of environmental issues that touch us at the community level. But at the same time, and above all, we support efforts to find effective means for addressing the climate crisis that overarches everything. By now, many of you are familiar with what we call our Planet Talks and Planet Walks, which are respectively the seminars and then the hands-on interactive experiences that we arrange from time to time. We invite you to visit our website or our Facebook page to check out past events. You'll find those in the chat. And we hope that you'll consider joining us in some of our future endeavors. As Allison mentioned, I'm going to repeat a little bit what Allison said. This is our 6th and final Planet Talk of our series that relates to the Climate Action Plan that was developed by the Maine Climate Council and issued last December. Once again, we'd like to express our appreciation for our partner in this project, the Kennebunk Free Library, which is truly an invaluable resource for us and for everyone in this community. To recap, the series actually began at the end of March when we had a wonderful presentation, a gathering of women poets who really gave voice to environmental concerns close to the heart. And following that, we had a kickoff event, which was a really cogent overview of the Climate Action Plan that we did in early April in cahoots with Union of Concerned Scientists. And then following that, we've had series, as Allison mentioned, on all and various topics of the working groups from the various working groups that Allison mentioned. And tonight, we're going to be learning more about the work being done in our state that relates to the section of the plan on coastal and marine matters. To start us off, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our first guest. Dr. Christine Fort is the director of the Coastal Training Program at the Wells Reserve and a research associate at the School of Marine and Environmental Programs at the University of New England. She facilitates the use of science in collaborative partnerships to protect water and to help communities protect nature and special places for future generations. Thank you for joining us, Chris.
Yes, thanks, Tom. See if I can get everything set. How's that? Everybody can see? All
Yep,
right, and how's the volume, Tom? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay, well, thank you so much for including me in this series. I've just been blown away with the different weeks and everything that's been presented, and I'm very honored to be included with all of my colleagues. It's nice to see familiar faces. I'm a relative newcomer to Kennebunk. We moved here 25 years ago, and if you are from Kennebunk, you know that I'm a newcomer for sure by that statement. This was the view from the school bus stop where 25 years ago, I waited with my daughter when we moved here. She was in kindergarten. And at that time, because it was winter, we were able to afford to live on the beach. So every week, I would wait with her for the bus. And a colleague or a friend of mine was there too, Dr. Mark Johnson of the University of New England. And I was kind of wondering, having just moved here, we moved with my husband's job. He was the manager of the Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge. I'd been a stay-at-home mom when Kelly was little, so I had no job when we moved here. And I was looking for the next opportunity to protect the things I care about, which are coastal and marine resources. So at the bus stop one day, Mark Johnson said to me, hey, one of the professors at UNE is going to be out the rest of the semester. They're looking for somebody to take over her classes. So the next day, I'm in talking to the dean of the School of Marine Science. And he said, well, when could you start? I said, I could be in the classroom tomorrow. And the very next day, I started my 20-year teaching experience at the University of New England. Now, the University of New England has an ideal setting at the mouth of the Saco River estuary. And the class I taught for over 20 years was called Introduction to Environmental Issues. That's what's called a survey class, where you just teach an overview of every possible environmental problem. I was teaching it to freshmen who were not environmental majors, who were forced to take the class. And I'm sure Melissa at Kennebunk High School might relate to that kind of audience. So we spent every semester, it was just a one semester class, talking about toxics, water pollution, climate change, deforestation. And you might wonder, how in the heck do you keep students motivated when all you're giving them is a dose of bad news day after day? But one thing I said to them, I said, literally, every problem we study in this class, there are hundreds of people working on solving that problem right now. And that's what this series has been about. And that's what tonight's presentations are going to be about, the kind of people who are working to solve the problems. So all of the issues we've learned about during this series related to the Maine Climate Action Plan are things that hundreds of people in Maine alone are working on solving. So tonight we're going to focus on what we learned with the Maine Coastal and Marine Working Group. Our chairs for that group were Kathleen Layden, who's the head of the Maine Coastal Program, and Dr. Heather Leslie, who's the head of the Darling Marine Center. And they were excellent. They were so good at participatory processes, and they herded the 38 cats on the group, plus all the people that worked together with us to create our section of the Maine Climate Action Plan. Now, just a little bit of review, because I know you've covered this for each of the talks you've had. The Maine Climate Council itself was created by the Maine legislature, and those members of the council that made the decisions were appointed by the governor. All the working groups, the 6 working groups that you see listed here, they were solicited from business, from organizations, from academic institutions, and I was the representative on coastal and marine for the Wells National Estuarine Research Reserve. And I know just about everybody on this call had some kind of input into this plan. The structure of the Maine Climate Action Plan, again, is based on state-of-the-art science. And if you haven't visited the Maine Climate Council website yet, I'm sure you've been inspired and you just spend all your spare time there as a result of this series. But this science report is the go-to for the entire state of Maine, summarizing climate science by the leading scientists in the state. They have a really cool website with a flip book. And you go to this and it's just like a regular book and you turn the pages and you can see the background. So every working group was charged with following the science. This is a little bit what the website looks like. Again, the Climate Change in Maine website. And if you haven't visited it, as a science geek, I send you to the climate dashboard. If you play around the climate dashboard, you can pick your house, for example, in a town, and you can look at what's going to happen to it in the future. You may or may not want to know, depending on how close you live to the ocean. But all of the reports all of the lists of everything we did for the past couple of years is at this climatecouncil.maine.gov. And one thing I created, my talk's gonna have a bunch of links, but I just made a Word document, which you'll have access to. So don't worry about writing down the links. Tomorrow, the Maine Climate Council is meeting from 9 to 10:30 in the morning for its quarterly update. And if you go to the Maine Climate Council website, if you'd like to join in on this, you do need to register, and you can listen and see what the workings of the council are like and what they're doing right now. So there's two overarching, again, you probably know this, but it's a review. I can't stop being a professor, even though I retired from that job. The two main goals of the Climate Action Plan are mitigation and adaptation. And as a review, mitigation is reducing the heat trapping gases, the carbon gases, to slow the pace of climate change. So mitigation is getting to net zero by 2045, reducing the heat trapping gases. Adaptation is what we can do to keep our communities and our people and our environment safe as climate change is happening. So the climate plan has mitigation goals for reducing carbon and adaptation goals for dealing with it. These 6 strategies on this slide are the strategies from the coastal and marine group. And where I've put the stars, I'm going to give you real world examples from the Wells Reserve of what those kind of abstract concepts look like. And then I challenge you, as you hear the other speakers, to think, oh yeah, they're doing strategy 3. Oh yeah, they're doing strategy 4. So the 4 stars and those 4 strategies I'll go into, just kind of segueing, let me check my time, to the what we're doing right in your backyard at the Wells Reserve. Now, if you're not familiar with the Wells Reserve, it might be because you call it Laud Home Farm, or it might even be because you call it the Refuge. It's a little bit confusing because the 3 entities, they do kind of coexist. Laud Home Farm is the historic name of the piece of land that is part of the Wells National Estuarine Research Reserve. And I know you've heard about the Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge from previous talks, and we're co-located. The reserve is over 2,000 acres, but 1,500 acres of that is owned by Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge. So we're very much together, and we're a place where we do science, we educate people K to gray, and the program I work with, the Coastal Training Program, educates decision makers like municipal officials, land trusts. Many of you have been to our trainings. We do trainings about coastal management and adapting to climate change. What you may not know is the Wells Reserve is part of a national system. Most people don't say our full name, which is the Wells National Estuarine Research Reserve. There are 29 reserves around the country. I should have put a red dot on Great Bay as well. Sorry, Melissa, it's just as important as Wells. You've got 2 National Estuarine Research Reserves close by, and the other 29 are scattered around the continental US, but we also have a reserve in Hawaii, Alaska, and in Puerto Rico. And these are a partnership with NOAA and either a local state agency or a nonprofit. So we work together as a system to study climate change around the country. So Wells is part of this national system. Now, climate action is not new to the Wells Reserve, and I know from what I know of all the other speakers, it is not new to any of these groups as well. Even though the Climate Action Plan is new, we have all been working for decades on these items. It's now just codified into a state approach, and we can continue to do the good work we're doing. Here's the mission of the Wells Reserve: to understand, protect, and restore coastal ecosystems of the Gulf of Maine through an integrated approach with research, land stewardship, environmental learning, and community partnerships. Partnerships, I should have like double super made that big. It's everything is about partnerships. We never do anything on our own. One thing we've done for mitigation, all of the electricity needs at the reserve are powered by solar. We've been doing this for a decade, and we've even changed out our heating system in the main visitor center. We still are not completely net zero, but we are net zero for everything that's electricity, and we're trying to reduce it even more. The first action plan, and I'm sorry, my little action strategy is kind of covered up by the stuff at the top of the screen. But it's to collect information, monitoring, and data that supports adaptive decision making. So this is the research part of the reserve. And this little apparatus is called a set table, a sediment elevation table that allows at a given point in the marsh that is set up and verified by satellite and by elevation, we can actually measure relative how sea level is relative to the surface of the marsh. Is the marsh being inundated? Is the marsh keeping up with sea level? And that's one of the main research things we do, as does the state of Maine, as does certainly Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge. So this is one of the research things that the reserve does. Let me just ask, who is my timekeeper? And how much time do I have? Because I don't want to cut into anybody else's time.
I don't think we have an official timekeeper,
Oh,
but
great. I love it when there's no timekeeper.
so
No.
I would put you on your own best judgment here.
Okay. All right. Now, I started this talk about opportunities. How do you have an opportunity to protect the things you care about? One thing the Wells Reserve does, we have opportunities for citizen science, and this is an opportunity tomorrow. We have a program called MIMIC, which scientists love acronyms. You all know that. It's the Marine Invader Monitoring and Information Collaborative at the Reserve, run by Jeremy Miller. And this sends citizen scientists out to measure the impacts of marine invasive species, something that is exacerbated by climate change. Tomorrow is the Zoom training for this. So if you're interested in mucking about the intertidal zone or docks and looking for these, you can sign up on the Wells Reserve calendar and join Jeremy, and you learn everything you need to know about monitoring for invasive species. So that's another example of our research. Strategy 2 is to provide technical assistance and outreach. So this is primarily what my program does, the Coastal Training Program, where we share the science, not just the science we learned at the Reserve, but science that some of you guys may learn. There could be something that's discovered at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, and we help spread that science to decision makers. And we do that in collaboration with scientists all over the state. We started doing this climate work in 2002. That's when my program was created, the Coastal Training Program. And I am aided in that with Annie Cox, who many of you know, Emily Green, and newly arrived Jessica Brunacini, who is working on climate adaptation. We did a program called Better Safe Than Sorry, engaging the 10 beach communities about planning for sea level rise. One of the most impactful things we did is we did a project with the New Jersey Reserve called the Sandy Dialogues, where we got municipal officials from Maine. We took them in a van to our New Jersey Reserve, which was right in the middle of Sandy. We didn't go during the middle of Sandy. We went after it was over, when they were recovering. And then we brought New Jersey officials back to Maine to meet with municipal officials here and have frank discussions about what could you do? What did they learn? And what could they teach us about getting ready for the future? Annie did a project with beach businesses in Kennebunkport and how they could prepare for coastal hazards. And we even joined all of the New England reserves to do a climate adaptation project with MIT, UNH, and the Consensus Building Institute. And all of these are on the Wells Reserve website. I spent the most time on the Wells Reserve website today that I have ever spent in my life, looking for all these stories, because after 20 years at the Wells Reserve, I wouldn't remember everything. Now we're working now with many partners and our colleague Kristen Grant on a project in Mid-Coast Maine. So we don't just work in Southern Maine, and that's a project around collaboration to increase social resilience in Mid-Coast Maine. Working with these partners to develop and carry out a tabletop scenario planning exercise for a coastal hazard event up in the mid-coast. Annie was telling me the other day that she had to invent a storm. So she kind of invented the storm and what would happen to these towns, but then she sent it to John Cannon, who's with the National Weather Service in Gray, Maine. And he kind of said, it was kind of like, that's not the way the force works. He said, Annie, that's not the way a storm works. And he helped her kind of tweak the plan for the storm so they could have a real scenario that these towns will get together, hopefully in the fall, and practice so they can be ready for coastal storms in the future. One of the big lessons we learned from doing this for 20 years is the skills you need to have these resilience dialogues. So we got a grant and we developed a training for people that engage in these tough dialogues, and we can teach this on demand. It's the skills that people need to facilitate and engage in dialogues to build resilience. Now, strategy 3, yeah, Tom.
Excuse me, Chris.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that maybe you should wind up pretty soon.
Okay,
so
I am almost done.
thank you very much.
Okay, just probably one more minute. So strategy 3 is about conserving land. And this is an excellent shot of the reserve and Rachel Carson Refuge. So we can check that box. We also worked with the Kennebunk River Watershed Management Plan, which was recently completed. And we've worked in Cape Nettic restoring buffers in the watershed. There'll be a talk at the Wells Reserve and on Zoom at the Wells Reserve May 24th about all these projects. And the last strategy is ecosystem planning and management. And we do that in the Saco watershed. We help work with the Saco Watershed Collaborative on ecosystem planning and planning for resilience. And we are hosting a webinar on living shorelines. And that's one of the topics in the Climate Action Plan. That'll be June 22nd. Now here's my last 2 slides. If you look at this picture, this is the Little River Inlet. So Wells is to the south, the bottom of the screen, Kennebunk's to the north. And you see that little red star. That's where I was Monday, listening to the terns and the piping plovers and looking out over this beautiful salt marsh. And this is what I saw in the spot where the red star was. It's an ancient tree stump. And right there in the middle of the salt marsh on this piece of Wells Reserve and Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge used to be a forest. And this is one of the most profound indications of sea level rise and climate change. And you've probably seen this as Kennebunk as well. So climate change is not new. It's just faster than it's been in the past. And when you look out across this salt marsh, it's hard to imagine that at one time it was totally a forest. So I'm going to turn this over to the rest of the speakers, and I hope you'll listen to them for other opportunities to get engaged in solving environmental problems. Thank you. Sorry to go over, but thanks, Tom.
No, it was so interesting, and I've lived here for over 25 years, about 27 years actually, and I had no idea that you did so many different things at the reserve there. It's really, I'm going to have to spend some hours exploring that because it's really fascinating.
Oh, that's great. That was my goal. One person met my goal.
Yeah,
I'm done. Thank you.
You won me for sure. Thanks so much, Chris. Next, we have Melissa Paley. Melissa is the Conservation Law Foundation's Great Bay Piscataqua waterkeeper, protecting and restoring New Hampshire's and Southern Maine's rivers, bays, and coast. Previously, Melissa was a principal of Cross Current Communications, which focused on environmental and social issues, and she also worked for the US EPA Region 1, Natural Resources Defense Council, and the World Resources Institute. Melissa has a BA and master's from Yale and currently serves on the boards of Kittery Land Trust, Kittery Climate Action Now, and the Maine Coast Heritage Trust Leadership Council. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Planeteers, for inviting me to join you tonight. It's great to, see so many familiar faces and some new ones, and learn from all of you about so many really interesting, important things going on. So I learned a lot from Chris's presentation as well. I live in Kittery Point, so I'm just to the south of all of you guys. But in my volunteer capacity, I'm involved with climate action issues and a lot of land conservation issues with the Kittery Land Trust and so forth. But my day job is the one with the coolest job title, and that is I'm the water keeper for the Great Bay Piscataqua Estuary with Conservation Law Foundation. And so Waterkeeper is, sort of keeper of the flames. It's got sort of a mythic kind of connotation, but the bottom line is that I advocate for the Great Bay Estuary, which is over my shoulder. And I'm going to share my screen and walk you through a little bit of the issues that I deal with as Waterkeeper, some of which obviously are climate related, but a lot are challenges that we face in this estuary that we need to restore while we have a bit of window here, because as you all know, our baseline is changing, right? We have an estuary in decline here. We need to bring it back to health so that it's better able to withstand the challenges that a changing climate will bring about. So I'm going to just real quickly walk you through the estuary here, because perhaps you're not so familiar with this place. Let's see, how do I advance my slides here? Oh, here we go. So the Great Bay Piscataqua Estuary straddles the New Hampshire and Maine border. It's a very convoluted network of 7 rivers, the bays, and the main stem of the Piscataqua River, which runs, which is the state line between the two states, and all of this fresh water meeting all of the salt water from the sea and coming in and out twice a day makes this estuary. It is a very complicated system, and if you back out a little ways, you'll see that the water that feeds these 7 rivers and the bays comes from 52 communities. 10 are in Maine, they flow into the Salmon Falls River, and 42 of the communities are in New Hampshire, and they flow into the Cachiko, the Bellamy, the Oyster, the Lamprey, the Exeter Squamscott, the Winnicott. So those are some of the rivers that I focus on. I like to think, in terms of watersheds, and erase all those state lines and town lines, and just be reminded about how water and the waterways in the seacoast region really dominate the landscape. And there's no better way to appreciate that than from the air. This is our heritage, our history, the basis of our economy in this region. And so this is the way I like to think of it. We're just a very watery place. The Great Bay Estuary, if you haven't been exploring it, it's a very diverse place. You have these really, it can be very tranquil up in the far reaches of the bay itself. We have all these head of tide rivers that go up into our urban areas, Dover, Rochester, Newmarket. These were the mill towns that powered, powered the economy in the 18th, 19th centuries. Certainly the port of Portsmouth is a very busy working harbor, and the Piscataqua, as you probably know, has some of the swiftest currents of any river in the continental US. We have these massive tankers going up and down the river, all the time. It's a very dynamic estuary, and yet it's also extremely ecologically rich, as estuaries tend to be, with marine mammals and fish and birds, and actually the horseshoe crabs are just starting to mate now. So my job as Waterkeeper is to advocate for this place, to understand whether it's getting better or getting worse, and work with scientists. I think Chris mentioned it's all about partnerships. I partner a lot with the Great Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, which is down here in the shores, actually pretty much right behind this photo. I partner a lot with scientists at the University of New Hampshire and the Jackson Estuarine Lab, with EPA, with the state agencies, both Maine and New Hampshire. So there's a lot of partners. So the bottom line is, I spend a lot of time thinking about 2 species in particular that are indicators of the health of the estuary. Eelgrass, which has sort of an unfortunate name because people don't generally have warm feelings about eels, but eelgrass is a submerged plant, a grass. And when estuaries, not just the Great Bay, but estuaries all around the world, when they're healthy, they have very lush meadows of these underwater grasses that provide habitat, produce oxygen, sequester a lot of carbon, soak up, utilize nutrients and pollutants that are in the water, and hold the sediment from the roots, hold sediment in place. Very, very important species that's really the sort of foundation of a healthy ecosystem. The bottom line, the bad news is that the eelgrass in the Great Bay Estuary is tremendously, has declined tremendously over the last 30 years. We've lost about half of the acreage of eelgrass we once had. And the eelgrass that we do have, some is very healthy and lush, but much of it is diseased. There's proliferation of nuisance algae and seaweeds. And the quality of the water has become such that it's turbid, and the eelgrass is unable to propagate. Eelgrass needs very clear water with a lot of light transmission, and we've lost a lot of those conditions. As a result, when the tide goes out, we have mats. Whoops, sorry. Let's see, I gotta go back. We have mats of algae, and when those die, they suck the oxygen out of the water instead of putting oxygen into the water. So that further compromises, the habitat that fish and shellfish need to survive. I meant to mention that about 70% of the commercial fisheries in the North Atlantic get their start in estuaries just like the Great Bay. So if we want to restore fisheries in the ocean, we really need to restore the health of the estuaries where these species breed and reproduce. So here's just a little bit of an indication of the loss of eelgrass in the Great Bay Estuary over the last 30 years, a loss of about 50% of the acreage, and furthermore, a loss of about 80% of the biomass. So we still have areas where there's eelgrass present, but it's not as thick and lush and healthy as it once was. You can see in terms of a map where the historic, we use 1996 as a baseline. That's when we really began to collect data on a very regular annual basis. And you can see the loss of coverage in the estuary. Another species we talk a lot about is oysters, and oysters are pretty amazing, not just because they're delicious, but because they are filter feeders. They grow on big reefs and they filter water incredibly effectively. A single oyster can filter 25 to 40 gallons of water per day. Taking up the sediment, utilizing the algae for nutrition, excreting little pellets. And back in the early 90s, before so many were wiped out, we had about 25 million oysters in the Great Bay Estuary. The estimates are that those oysters could filter the entire volume of water in the Great Bay Estuary every 4 days. Now, sadly, we've lost about 90% of the oysters in the Great Bay Estuary, largely from disease. So the coupling of the loss of oysters and the loss of eelgrass has really thrown this estuary into a downward spiral, kind of a death spiral. And that is the work that we're trying to turn around. Now, a lot of the problems that impact oysters, that impact eelgrass especially, come from the land. So we have a lot of pollutants coming in to the estuary through the river, from the rivers and into the bays. And it comes from a lot of different sources. One of our principal pollutants is nitrogen. Nitrogen is a fertilizer. It's a necessary element for life, but when we have too much of it, it's a pollutant. And we have about 3 times too much nitrogen in our estuary than we should for it to be healthy. So it's coming from a lot of places. We have 18 wastewater treatment facilities in our 52 communities. All of that waste goes, ultimately into the estuary, and our population in this region has doubled over the past 50 years. That's more people, more sewage. In addition to the 18 wastewater treatment plants, about half of the people who live in this watershed, about 400,000 people, have septic systems, and septic systems are a tremendous source of nitrogen and phosphorus pollution. We've had a lot of landscape change. We've had a lot of development with shopping malls and roads and highways and pavement, and every time it rains on all of that hardened surface, that water picks up pollutants and it washes into storm drains and it goes straight into the nearest, wetland or stream. So we look at pavement and what we call impervious surface, if you want to use a big word. And this is an example of the amount of impervious paved hardened surfaces that we've seen just in the last, this is just a 20-year kind of snapshot here of one of our watersheds, the Cachiko River. And virtually in every single town, there's been a doubling of the amount of paved surface in the last 20 years. And this is true throughout the watershed. And I am sure that it's true in all of the communities here in Southern Maine. So, we've lost a tremendous amount of the forested and farmed landscape where water can soak into the ground, where those pollutants can be absorbed before they head into our waterways. I mentioned earlier, septic systems, big problem. The liquid waste is very high in nitrogen. Septic systems were not designed to remove nitrogen from waste. That nitrogen, it's water soluble. It moves right through the tank, out into the leach field, and on into the aquifer or into the nearest stream. Fertilizers, we have lots of people putting a lot of fertilizer on lawns, and much of that gets either there's too much put down, it's put down before rain. A lot of that ends up in our waterways. And for people who are fortunate enough to live by the water's edge, if there's no buffer, no plants and brush and vegetation to prevent runoff, then all of that fertilizer just goes straight into the water. Pet waste is another source of pollution. That's why it's so important to pick up after pets. So, in our estuary, we think about a third of the nitrogen pollution comes from the wastewater treatment facilities, and 2/3 comes from all this other stuff, non-point source, stormwater, septic systems. And I'm not going to go into this, but this is a further breakdown of where all this nitrogen is coming from. So the bottom line is, in order to restore this estuary, to bring it back to health, to try to get some more balance now with the eelgrass and oysters and all the other, plants and animals that make this a healthy ecosystem, we have to tackle nitrogen pollution coming from wastewater. And we're making a lot of headway on that front in this area. In the last 6 years or so, we've had about $200 million invested in wastewater treatment facility upgrades in municipalities around the estuary. So we're making really good headway there. And that's largely due to the advocacy of groups like CLF that have forced EPA to enforce the Clean Water Act and require municipalities who were operating antiquated facilities to upgrade those facilities. But we have a lot of work to do on the stormwater non-point source side. And I think Chris mentioned land conservation as an extremely important part of the kind of action we can take to improve water quality, buffers, stormwater infiltration, reducing the use of fertilizers and pesticides, improving codes for septic systems, especially in areas where water quality is already impaired, and then just a tremendous amount of work to do on education, especially for local decision makers, those people on planning boards and city councils and conservation commissions who are making decisions every day, every week about how land gets used. Those are the kinds of changes that are really ultimately going to improve the health of this estuary. We have a lot of great stuff going on around Great Bay. We have a burgeoning oyster aquaculture industry. This is Brian Giannacco, who runs Virgin Oysters, one of 20 or so commercial growers in the estuary. And those oysters are producing jobs, they're producing food, and while they're at it, they're helping to clean up the estuary. The Nature Conservancy is doing a lot of really great work to rebuild non-commercial oyster reefs, trying to repopulate the oysters and reefs that will again contribute to improved water quality. There's a lot of work going on here around dam removal. This was a dam that was removed in downtown Exeter The town of Durham is actively discussing what to do with the mill dam. These are the kinds of things that will restore habitat and improve water quality. If this comes out, it will restore some better balance, certainly restore fish passage up into the Oyster River. Now, getting to the climate action plan, I think its goal 4 is about, natural solutions. How do we restore natural functions? And one of those is eelgrass restoration. And in fact, next week, I embark on an eelgrass restoration pilot project with a team of scientists and researchers from UNH, from Boston University and elsewhere. And we're harvesting 7,500 plants from different parts of the estuary, and we're planting them in 5 locations, and we'll monitor them all summer. We're thinking that water quality, because of this investment in wastewater, is improving in certain areas. We've got a model that has identified where we have sites that are most suitable for eelgrass recovery. And we're going to plant small test plots and monitor carefully and see if we can get some recovery here. And if we do, we can scale this up in a big way over the coming years and try to accelerate the recovery of this basis of the ecosystem. But we're really in a race against time, and that's the bottom line. We have a lot of impacts of climate change that are already being felt here. We have increasing sea level. We have much greater storm surge. This is downtown Portsmouth during a nor'easter last year. This is not uncommon in this area. We are absolutely seeing impacts of climate change on a regular basis. This is just south of my estuary. This is the Hampton Seabrook estuary, but does this look vulnerable to you? This is a king tide. So it's an astronomically high tide, but it's a good proxy for what sea level rise means for our vulnerable coast here in this, certainly in this New Hampshire and to some extent in our southern Maine coastal region. Another issue that we're looking a lot at is groundwater rise. It's kind of the stepchild that doesn't get talked about so much in terms of increased storm surge and frequency and intensity of rain events and sea level rise. But as sea level rises, it is also causing water tables to rise. The hydrostatic pressure of the water of sea level rise creates a bulge in the aquifer, and water tables are rising. That means that shallow buried infrastructure, like hazardous waste sites, like septic systems, like roads, pipelines, other things, are now vulnerable to being inundated on a pretty regular basis under different scenarios of sea level rise. And these impacts are being felt not just along the coastal fringe, but miles inland. It's being modeled by a professor at UNH, Jane Knott and Jennifer Kellogg, drawing a blank on her name. But anyway, it's a very important phenomenon that is also something that we have to be mindful of as we talk about adaptation to climate change. So the work of the waterkeeper is to advocate, to get up, to speak out, to try to get policies and programs in place that are going to restore this estuary while we have a chance before climate impact really, is full on in our face. My final slide is that I often like to say is that this area is just incredibly beautiful. We're so fortunate to live in a place where we have such natural beauty and places to recreate and play and raise our families and run our businesses. But if it's only pretty and it's sort of a nice sunset to put on Instagram, but it's not healthy, then we have not done our job, and we have to do better. So that's our work, all of us, and it's a privilege to be the voice for the Great Bay Estuary and to do work with so many people who really do care about this amazing region where we get to call home. I would be happy to answer questions or to wait till the end. I'm not sure what the format is, but feel free to contact me. And this is how I can be reached. And thanks again for including me.
Thank you very much, Melissa. I think there might be a question or two in there, but I think we will save for the end. But that was incredibly informative, and thank you so much. And I am glad to see for us in Kennebunk that a number of candidates for the select board are here. So definitely food for thought for planning into the future. So thank you so much, Melissa. Next, we have Gail Bonas. Gail manages the Coastal Resilience Program at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute's Climate Center. She collaborates with stakeholders to design and deliver engagement, educational, and training programs. These provide coastal communities with knowledge, skills, and tools to support the development of community-focused resilience plans. Welcome, Gail.
Thanks so much, Tom, and thanks for including me in this really fabulous panel. It's lovely to see some familiar faces. As Chris said at the beginning, partnership is like a heart of what we do, and a lot of us here partner on these projects. So it's great to reconnect and learn more about what each other is doing. All right, let me share my screen. All right. So for those of you who may not be familiar, the Gulf of Maine Research Institute is located in Portland, Maine, right on the waterfront. And as an institute, we're working to catalyze solutions to really complex ocean challenges. We have many different programs across our research community and education departments. And I'm working with our kind of newly developed climate center, and climate change really is the challenge of our time. So just to introduce you a little bit as to where we're going with the Climate Center, because as I mentioned, it's a kind of a rather new development at GMRI. So we really wanted to recognize climate change as that kind of problem that we all need to grapple with right now. And as an organization across our projects and departments, we've been working on climate-related topics for many years, but we really needed to pull it all together. And so that's what this Climate Center is working to do, to work across our fishery science, our seafood programs, aquaculture programs, and then the community resilience work that I've been doing. We're also looking to build our capacity to provide end-to-end services for folks, moving from generating that new localized climate data to understand those projections better, to working with communities and municipalities and corporations, to thinking about solutions and how to inform policy, and then also how do we finance this work, and really looking not just at adaptation, but also at mitigation as well. So the work that I do, the Coastal Resilience Program, really originated about 5 or 6 years ago, hosting community dialogues. We got to go to about 30 coastal communities in Maine and really saw just a huge kind of desire for folks to engage in this work. And also just a really big need in communities to be able to have a space to have these dialogues, a space to look at the data and to talk to your neighbors and to talk to decision makers about what does that data, what does sea level rise mean for me, and what does it mean for my community. We've also had a few other projects that have cropped up over those years. We developed a high school curriculum, and that one gives students kind of the knowledge and the skills and also the confidence to then go out and engage with their communities and to do some engagement around local sea level rise impacts themselves. And this week, actually, we are expanding our citizen science project to do some coastal flood monitoring in Portland and South Portland. So you can find out more about that on our website, or I'll post a link after I'm done this little talk. We launched that project in Belfast in the fall, and we're really excited to be expanding that with some other communities. High Water Week next week, so be on the watch for that. And then we've also worked with South Portland on doing some more community mapping. If you've ever looked at a sea level rise map, if you're like most people, the first thing you do is look at your home and is my home going to get wet, or look at a place that I specifically care about. what we wanted to do is to create a framework for a community to emerge the complex and broader impacts of sea level rise to a community as a whole. So how complex is that across thinking about infrastructure, ecosystem, social resilience, and economy? So that project provides some framing around that. But through all of this work, we really noticed that there is a great need in Maine, as well as probably some other states too, to do some capacity building. Resilience planning is kind of a new kind of frame of thought or frame of planning for a lot of people. So as you may have seen, if you looked at the Maine Won't Wait document, they did a great job at analyzing where we have resilience planning capacity in the state. So in the shades of dark blue that you can see down here in Southern Maine, that's where we have some resilience planning capacity. So although that's really great for those of you in Southern Maine and Kennebunk, it's also rather minimal compared to a lot of other urban centers. So although we have that capacity, there's still great needs there. But you can also see throughout the state, there's a real huge lack of capacity there. And when we're thinking about resilience planning, it's really thinking about planning in a different way. We need to be able to plan forward as opposed to planning backwards based off of past experiences. We need to be able to incorporate data sets and science into our planning, and also to incorporate our community as a whole into that planning process as well, to make sure that we're creating plans that are equitable for all, not just for a few. So in the summer of 2019, GMRI hired an outside consultant to do a needs assessment around resilience planning. So it's pretty well known that knowledge does not directly lead towards action. So we really wanted to dig into what is that gap when it comes to resilience planning? What are some of the barriers there? What are some of the needs in communities to go from knowledge around these climate impacts that we have the data, we have the projections, how do we get to resilience action around it? So these are some things that emerged through that needs assessment by doing interviews with about 40 resilience professionals and stakeholders in coastal communities. We found that there's no common language when it comes to resilience planning, or sometimes with the data, making sure that we're talking about the same data sets in the same way. So that way we can frame questions correctly and be on the same page. Also, we have professionals with training and background that are talking perhaps with folks that are just being exposed to some of this data for the first time. So how do we bridge that gap in knowledge to create common language for all to participate on an equal level? Also saw that communities don't have a sense of urgency around climate change. We're talking about planning 30, 50 years out. So how do we address that and create the urgency around that when they're also looking at some really major issues that need to be addressed right now? Can we bring in some framing around multi-solving? So we're not just solving for today's problems, but also creating some solutions that will support resiliency decades to come. We saw that framing for decision-making is often made through an economic lens, but it really also needs to be balanced with other perspectives, including social perspectives, cultural perspectives, environmental perspectives, making sure that it's representing the diversity of the community and is equitable for all. And we saw that decision support also needs to be really highly localized. Some communities have been doing a lot of work in this for a while and have been engaging around what their impacts might be and what's to come and what their community needs are. Others are just starting. So the decision support really needs to start where community is at. And decision-making really, we can introduce all these tools, but unless we create a space for communities to work together and to learn from each other and to build relationships, they're not going to move forward. Experts and stakeholders alike would really benefit by understanding and working through scenarios, which is kind of similar to some of the work that Chris mentioned earlier, involving relevant data, real life scenarios, making sure it's based in place and using science. And that there's a lot of importance in this work to develop skills and also to develop relationships between community members, between leaders, maybe emerging leaders, and also linking them through to other communities, other regions, and resilience professionals. So what we're doing with that, we just received a grant from NOAA's Environmental Literacy Program to develop rural resilience trainings for coastal communities. So we're in our first year of that grant. So right now we are working with our partners, or about to engage our partners over the summer. Really looking forward to hopefully meeting in person now that some COVID restrictions are getting lifted. And you can see the partners listed on the slide, and it does include quite a few folks that are on this topic. So I'm really looking forward to that work. So this first year, as I said, we'll be developing this curriculum, and these trainings are going to focus on some of those things that emerged during that needs assessment. So making sure that we're developing knowledge, skills, and relationships to foster conversations within communities, amongst their leaders, amongst emerging leaders. So that way everybody's starting at the same place with these conversations. And we're wanting to support a process for decision making. So how do we introduce grappling with these really tough questions, with this really gnarly data, this really complex impact, providing them with a framework in order to do that and then apply it to their own communities. We're also wanting to build connections between communities. So we'll be working with regions to foster relationships, and to also think about the issues of coastal that we're going to see with sea level rise and flooding in kind of a bigger way. So what are some of the regional issues that perhaps communities could tackle together and work on? And we really want to hold equity at the heart of this work. So making sure that we're representing the diversity of the communities within each of these trainings, and elevating voices of folks that typically don't show up on a Tuesday evening to participate in webinars like this. But thank you to all of you that do. But we want to make sure that we're getting the folks that may not typically do this work, but do have the intrinsic motivation or need or kind of desire to do that work. So along with this, we're also going to kind of package the projects that we've been doing before, and really provide kind of an interdisciplinary and multiple ways to engage stakeholders as we're working in these communities. So kind of back to the strategies that Chris laid out that are in the Maine Won't Wait document. This work, although was kind of developed before Maine Won't Wait came out, does address multiple of these strategies in different ways. So we're really excited to be able to support this work by the Maine Climate Council. So that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gail. That was wonderful, and it's so nice to have you visit us here in Kennebunk via the Zoom here.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess next we will have Kristen Grant. I've heard Kristen's Grant brought up a few times here. So let's hear from Kristen. Kristen began her extension work with Maine Sea Grant and the University of Maine's Cooperative Extension in 1999. Her work focuses on coastal community development, including issues from coastal access and working waterfronts to stakeholder engagement to community science. And Kristen is program manager for the Southern Maine Beach Profile Monitoring Program, of which we Planeteers are part of your team. So welcome, Kristen.
Thanks for having me, Tom. Really glad to be here. And just let me get my PowerPoint up here. All right, so I'm here today to tell you a brief story of the Southern Maine Beach Profile Monitoring Program. And the first question that might come to mind is, well, what is beach profiling? It's a natural question. And I'll state simply that it's a surveying technique that's used to measure the contour of a beach. And you can see right here in this picture, the very simple equipment that is used and to help the volunteers get this work done on the beaches. You'll get to see a few more pictures as we move along here. The program began in 1999 as a research project that was proposed by geologists at the University of Maine and Maine Geological Survey. And it was funded in 1999 by Maine Sea Grant. And at this point, the program is coordinated in partnership with the Wells National Estuarine Research Reserve and also with Maine Coastal Program. But we need funding to make the program operate. So the way that happens is that the municipalities where the beaches are profiled provide the funding. So I want to thank all of the towns that continue to contribute, that include York, Ogunquit, Wells, Kennebunkport, Biddeford, Saco, Old Orchard, Scarborough, and South Portland. But more important than any of them are the volunteers, because we would not have a program, we would not have data, and we would not have decisions to be informed were it not for the volunteers. So we have 120 more, give or take, volunteers that are community-based, from coastal property owners to students and teachers. And the volunteers work in teams on each of 12, 13 beaches, depending on the year. And they volunteer to do their profiling one time a month, 12 months a year, now for 22 years. So just major thanks and recognition to the volunteers for their work. As I said, no program without them. And both Tom and Andrea are members, as I'm sure there are other members on the meeting with us right now. So again, just thank you. And so the goal of the program is to develop this, ideally, a sort of long-term record of change on Maine's beaches in order to promote understanding of coastal processes, in order to inform beach management, and in the process to create this network of trained volunteers who can act as liaisons between the beaches and their communities. So, so at this point, you might be wondering, well, what sorts of beach management decisions have been informed? So we'll go there next. And I'll talk a bit about the State of Maine's Beaches report, which is developed by Maine Geological Survey biennially. So they use the data from the beach profiling program to develop this comprehensive report that looks at each of the monitored beaches and the kinds of changes that have been seen on that beach in whatever time period the geologists decide they want the report to focus on. So it might be multiple years, it might be, the impacts of a specific storm, but looking at some trends in the long term and seasonal trends, and the recovery of beaches due to storms. So as I said, the report has been released biennially since 2007. The most recent was in 2019. But COVID, as it has done to many things, has set us a bit off schedule. So the next full report will be in 2022. But in 2021, on October 5th, we'll be hosting a State of the Beaches webinar. So we want to make sure that, I'll be in touch with Tom and Andrea to make sure that the information about when that State of the Beaches webinar will be held can be made available to all of you if you're interested. And so another question that might be occurring to you is, who are in fact the users of the data? So after the analysis is conducted by Maine Geological Survey, the data is applied by Maine Department of Environmental Protection, the Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the local municipalities, and really importantly, the National Weather Service, because we work with the National Weather Service to employ our beach profiling volunteers as storm monitors for the National Weather Service. So John Cannon from the National Weather Service will make a call out to our volunteers requesting that there's a storm on the way, and we're hoping for additional profiling just pre and just post the storm. And with that additional data, along with the regular monthly data, this is helping the National Weather Service to more accurately do its storm forecasting. and then on to how it is used. So I'll start with a sort of general characterization of how it's used, since it, over 22 years it's been used quite a bit. But some of the major categories include tracking long-term trends in erosion rates, investigating new erosion mitigation technologies, designing dune restoration projects, evaluating the effectiveness of beach nourishment and where to place it, guiding harbor dredging plans, monitoring the management of endangered species such as the piping plover, and estimating the carrying capacity for recreational beach use. So with those categories in mind, I'm going to just point out a few examples just from like the last year, 2 years. So one example is at Long Sands Beach in York, where the beach profiling data was used to develop an innovative redesign of the seawall at that beach, which you can see in this picture right here. And you can see it's a tiered step design, which helps to break up the wave energy as it's coming onto the beach. So that the idea is that there's less impact, erosive impact on the beach, on the road, on the infrastructure, and on the surrounding buildings. So there's one example from York, and again, got the listed team members there. So thanks to the team members in York. Moving on to an example at Camp Ellis in Saco, and here the beach profiling data has been used to track erosion after beach nourishment, which is the transportation basically of sand from one place onto a beach. So with the movement of sand onto Camp Ellis to address erosion problems there, and the tracking, the beach profiling data is used to track the movement of that sand because it's moved from the place where it was intended at Camp Ellis north. So this is giving us an ability to look at where it is actually going. And another call out to our beach profiling volunteers in Saco. And then Gooch's Beach in Kennebunk. So in this case, the data is being used by the Army Corps of Engineers to conduct an environmental assessment that will be used for a study to repair the jetties at the Kennebunk River. So, and again, list of volunteers from our Gooch's Beach team. So awesome. Contributions from our volunteers have made it possible for the Maine Geological Survey to analyze the data, which has then been made available for folks to apply in all these various ways. And then I'll just touch quickly on the main venue for sharing the information with folks far and wide is the Beaches Conference. And again, COVID has done a bit of a number on us here because it should have been held this summer, but it will be held in the summer of 2022. And again, if you'd be interested, we could make that available about when and where exactly it will be held in 22. It'll either be in June or July to this group. And the place that I'll wrap up here is just if you were, picturing yourself possibly as a volunteer beach monitor for beach profiling, I'd be really happy to hear from you. So I've got my contact information right here, and please join us as being a hardy Mainer making a difference on Maine's beaches. So thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, Kristen. That was great. And at this point, I would mention to anyone in the audience to, if you don't already have this habit, which I learned belatedly, you might want to, when we get towards the end of the program, you might want to like copy and paste all of the chat so that you have all the references that people are putting in there, because it's such a wealth of information there. Thanks again, Kristen. Next, we have Abby Sherwin. And Abby is a senior planner and coastal resilience coordinator with the Southern Maine Planning Development Commission and Regional Sustainability and Resilience Program. She provides technical assistance and planning support to communities specializing in coastal resiliency, climate adaptation planning, floodplain management, and hazard mitigation. She served on the Climate Council's Community Resilience Working Group. Thanks for being here, Abby. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks everybody for having me. Is my audio okay? Sometimes my microphone drops out a little bit on my
Sounds
headset.
good.
Okay, I'm gonna pull up my slides here. Okay, is everyone seeing that?
Yep.
Great. All right, wonderful. Thank you. So, thank you again. I'm Abby Sherwin. I'm a senior planner and coastal resilience coordinator with Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission, or more commonly known as our acronym of SMPDC. And we are a regional planning organization serving 39 member municipalities in York County, a few in Oxford County, and then we have one in Cumberland County as well. So we work with and on behalf of the municipalities on all things related to regional planning. So we provide land use planning assistance, economic development guidance, transportation planning work, and then more recently, we've started providing sustainability and resilience planning services to our towns as well. And we are really all about strengthening municipal government, advocating on behalf of communities, and leveraging resources to make sure that our community's needs are being met and that we're providing planning assistance when necessary. So we have a few major areas where we focus our efforts, including land use planning, providing comprehensive planning assistance to municipalities, which is the long-range planning process that municipalities use to outline their goals and objectives and strategies for how they want their communities to look in the near and the short term, or the long term rather. We provide training to our communities about topics of interest, and those are really focused on planning issues, but range from economic development to transportation topics, land use, economic development, and all sorts of other issues. We also provide direct technical assistance to our municipalities and link our communities with experts and resources when SMPDC staff can't necessarily provide the level of information that's necessary. We'll link our communities with state and other regional experts and resources as well to address municipal planning needs. So I mentioned that more recently we've begun to work in the sustainability and resilience realm. So 6 towns of York, Kittery, Kennebunkport, Wells, and Ogunquit came together in 2019 with the common need and identified objective of advancing municipal resilience and sustainability, and also the acknowledgement that they lacked the capacity in-house to tackle those issues. So those 6 communities reached out to SMPDC and asked if there was any way that we could provide assistance. So working in collaboration, we formed the Regional Sustainability and Resilience Program, which is working with those 6 municipalities to foster more sustainable and resilient communities in coastal York County, really by leveraging regional collaboration and resources to achieve municipal resilience and sustainability goals, and also regional resilience and sustainability goals. And we're really focused on assisting municipalities with driving sustainability and resilience action forward. So some of the work that we're doing at SMPDC and through that regional sustainability resilience program include helping communities begin to understand impacts of coastal hazards and really begin to translate information about impacts into actionable planning information. So we have a few grant-funded projects right now that are focused on coastal flooding hazards and impacts associated with sea level rise. The first project that I'm going to highlight is called the Tides, Taxes, and New Tactics Project. And I've heard folks mention several times how important partnerships are. So we are partnering with the Wells Reserve, Kristen Grant, the previous speaker, and some other groups in Maine to work on this project. So the core component of it is a vulnerability assessment, looking at the impacts of different sea level rise scenarios to people, property, and the local economy in the towns of York, Wells, and Kennebunk. And we're using that information really to increase understanding and awareness about what the impacts in these towns could be, and then using that information in partnership with the towns to develop locally tailored adaptation and resilience strategies, and also flood mitigation measures, again, to protect the communities and help them begin planning now for the long-term impacts of climate change and sea level rise. We're also sharing the results of that project through community engagement workshops, and then all of the information from that will be combined into sort of the basis of a regional sea level rise plan that can be used by municipalities to really begin to prepare for and plan for rising seas and coastal hazards. We also have another grant-funded project that's focused on economic and business resilience and planning for coastal storm hazards. We all know that the tourism economy is really important for Southern Maine, especially our beach communities. And that economy is really threatened by and vulnerable to coastal flood hazards. So this project is trying to dig a little deeper into understanding what hazards our communities are facing in terms of coastal storms and sea level rise, assess vulnerability to those hazards, and also understand the connection between those hazards and the coastal and marine economy and the tourism economy. And then again, compiling that information and distilling it into a regional economic resilience plan that will identify strategies and solutions for helping to protect the local and regional economy in the future as storms become more intense and severe and as sea levels rise. We also have another grant-funded project that is focusing on the development of a regional coastal resilience plan. And that project is funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation through the Coastal Resilience Fund. Again, going back to partners, we are working with the 10 Southern Maine coastal communities, the Wells Reserve, local land trusts, the Nature Conservancy, Maine Coast Heritage Trust, and other local conservation groups to conduct a regional project that will focus on assessing regional needs and conditions when it comes to coastal resilience, conducting a broad brush coastal hazard assessment to understand better the impacts of sea level rise, coastal storms, beach erosion, shoreline change, and a slew of other coastal hazards that are linked to climate change. So that information can be used to identify really vulnerable areas in the region along the coastline that need more targeted focus and work. We're also developing a resilience working group for that project to oversee the project's work and make sure that the outcomes and the work products are meeting the needs of the stakeholders that are involved and the partners that are participating. And then again, identifying and prioritizing strategies and projects that will help protect our coastal communities and our really vulnerable areas from the hazards that we're facing. And this project is going to take a very strong focus on nature-based solutions and things like land conservation and trying to leverage regional partnerships and resources to pursue more nature-based solutions in our everyday decision-making. And this will ultimately result in a regional resilience plan that will hopefully identify projects that are sort of well-positioned for additional funding and resources so that we can move from the planning phase of this work to actual implementation and on-the-ground projects. We are also working with our member municipalities to develop very specific coastal resilience strategies that address local vulnerabilities, again, to people, property, natural resources, and the economy. So we're working with communities to identify specific projects, and these include infrastructure projects, infrastructure upgrades, and other sort of on the ground shovel ready projects to address coastal hazards. Also working really closely with municipalities and municipal planners to identify opportunities for integrating coastal resilience measures into land use regulations and land use planning, so that we're ensuring that development is sort of shifting away from the vulnerable areas, and then existing development in vulnerable areas is as best protected as it can be. And then also working with municipalities to identify policy options and measures, and ways that municipalities can begin to consider climate change impacts, sustainability principles, and resilience measures in their day-to-day decision making, so that really the decisions that we're making today are going to position us well to deal with climate change impacts in the future. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that this is going back to sort of the technical assistance and linking communities with external resources and experts. We are holding an informational webinar on June 16th about the impacts of sea level rise on groundwater in our coastal areas. As one of the other speakers mentioned, sea level rise has far-reaching impacts, and groundwater is not exempt from those. So sea level rise causes groundwater to rise and can damage infrastructure from below. It also can cause saltwater intrusion into our freshwater resources. So we're bringing in 2 experts on the matter to have a discussion about what this could mean for Southern Maine, and just provide more information about what the impacts could be and what some next steps are for our communities to begin further investigating this problem. So my contact information is there, and I'll also just add that both SMPDC and the Regional Sustainability and Resilience Program within SMPDC have newsletters that we send out monthly or bi-monthly, and you can sign up for those on our website, and they have a lot of great information about upcoming events and the projects that we're working on.
Wow, thank you so much, Abby. What a comprehensive array of projects that you have going there. It's really, really impressive. So thanks again, and we'll definitely be in touch, and I'm sure with our town officials will be as well. Those of you who were with us 2 weeks ago will remember that we had a presentation by students from Kennebunk High School. This evening, we'll have another contribution by that same student group, this time in the form of a video. Introducing this production will be Melissa Lucci, their student science teacher at Kennebunk High School, and Leah Lowry, who is the Director of Programs and Outreach at the Kennebunkport Climate Initiative. Welcome, Melissa and Leah.
Hi there, just getting ready to share my screen. So my name is Leah Lowry, and of course I'm here with Melissa. We are not nearly as exciting as the students who presented, but we're gonna do our best just to give you a little bit of background. And I know that we're over time, so we're gonna try and go super, super quick. The Gulf of Maine Field Studies is really a joint project between multiple organizations. It was the brainchild that came out of the Gulf of Maine Institute, Kennebunkport Conservation Trust, RSU 21, and UNE through a NOAA Be Wet grant that that GOME had, and it was trying to address renewable energy. And John Terry, executive director, sat down with me, and I thought, you know, why don't we try and get Goat Island off the grid, because that was a really small problem to achieve. I thought, why not? And we'll do it with students, because even better. So we started that process with the students, and it ended up talking with Melissa and Pam. We partnered up to really create a holistic class that would take students through real life science. That's not a canned experiment that we don't necessarily know the answers to. So we're on the journey with them, and then having them so that quantitative scientific data, and then in the springtime, really connecting with the community to talk to them about what's happening and getting the word out and understanding the complex problems. So in the fall, of course, they always do sort of the scientific experiments, but our goal was really to try and get them out into the local landscape and get them identifying with the issues that they can understand. And Melissa's going to talk more about the power of that and the reason for that in just a second. But these students understanding what's in their own backyard and being able to think locally, think globally, but act locally was hugely important. This demographic can get very discouraged, and I'm not going to take Melissa's wind there. But we realized that there was a different way to teach science where they could get out into the community and do hands-on experiments and introduce themselves to community members and really empower their voices. So Goat Island obviously was our first, but as we were studying Goat Island, there was so many other issues in the Gulf of Maine that came up. And so we started really shifting our focus into what is happening in this community and in their backyard based on climate change, and what are some of the things that they can do to alter that. What we realized very quickly was that students have a very powerful voice in our communities. If I walk into a room working for the Kennebunkport Conservation Trust, or now the Climate Initiative, people automatically assume what I think, believe, and how I vote, and they may or may not listen. Students can walk into a room and really have hard conversations that once they're taught how to communicate really effectively, and open up a room in ways that perhaps adults can't always do. So we really had them explaining what data they did, and then we had them communicating with town members, elected officials, community members, lifelong fishermen, generation fishermen. We had them talking to all different people in the community that may or may not normally be asked their opinion or their thoughts or their stories. And so it started to become this program of stories of change. And these students, we study, in fact, Melissa actually texted me partway through and said, we are linked to almost every speaker here. The kids do beach monitoring, they do invasive species monitoring, we've adapted the sea level rise curriculum that Gail worked on, and they do action projects, they do community mapping, they do all sorts of these things through this class. And this class actually created actual change in the community here in Kennebunkport. This picture was actually during a filming for the Kennebunkport Climate Initiative, which really was born out of the Gulf of Maine field studies. It is really important to connect these students not just to their local landscape, but to the people of their community, and to teach them that being part of a community can be really empowering, and that they do have a voice that is important. And most of our kids this year, I was blown away. We just had a webinar, and I want to say, Melissa can correct me if I'm overblowing it, but I want to say 90% of the students are going into environmental topics for college, and that may or may not have been the case in the very beginning. And almost all of them in their post interviews were saying that they're going to carry these actions and their feeling of empowerment and their activism forward to the communities that they are going to. So what they've learned is that, number one, they have a really powerful voice. Number two, that they can take action. And number three, that being part of a community doesn't necessarily mean only Kennebunk, but they can be a part of a community anywhere, and that they have a valid voice, and that they have valid points, and they are educated to make change. I am not going to go any further. All I will say is that KCI that came out of this is very much based on partnerships. The one thing that we say in almost any meeting, we have lots and lots of partners. And one of the things that we try to always make very clear, and I think everyone in this Zoom call will agree with me, is that this is a very huge task, and there's no king of the mountain, and it's going to take all of us working together and collaborating to walk up that mountain to really solve this problem. So we really want these kids to understand that community is paramount, and that all of us collaborating together is paramount in solving this problem, and that their voices really need to be heard, and that they can do actionable things to start solving the problem and feel empowered. So I'm going to hand it over to Melissa.
Leah, can you go back to the previous slide?
Oh, with the fishbowl?
Yep.
Yep.
So I just want to point out the picture in the lower left-hand corner. It's the Kennebunkport Conservation Trust headquarters, and it's also the Tesla that belongs to the Kennebunk Fire Chief, part of the fire department. And those two decisions to get Kennebunkport Conservation Trust headquarters off the grid and for the fire chief to purchase the Tesla came directly from their work with this class. So they are actually putting money where their mouth is, and they are creating change based on suggestions from students. So that's pretty cool. If you, next slide. If you ask a teenager how they feel about climate change, you'd likely hear that they are absolutely overwhelmed. Frankly, they're angry. They're a little pissed off. They're hugely resentful. They are sad, and they feel really hopeless. And that's just crushing. It crushes anyone's soul who sort of digs deeper into environmental issues and talks about climate change. We use Gale Bonus's sea level rise curriculum, and we've adapted it for our class. And we dive into really deeply sea level rise, especially how it affects Leah.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Okay. Sorry. So one thing we learn when we're dealing with sea level rise is that what sea level rise looks like today, mean sea level rise in 2021 here in Kennebunkport, looks like this. But with you know, the not so off ridiculous predicted 8-foot sea level rise by 2100, the community that they live in is going to look like this. And so chances are that the community that they live in and raise their children in is going to look very different than what it looks like today. And that's incredibly frightening to them. Next slide. And so how can we change this? How can we give our kids hope? They didn't create this problem, but they get resentful that they're the ones who feel like they are the ones that have to deal with it. And so for them, they want action now, because later is too late. So the whole point of this class is not only to get them out into their community and into their backyards, but it's also to create hope and give them hope and hope to make change. So Leah and I feel that environmental science education and their experiences should be community-based, involve community partners, be authentic and engaging, be viewed through the three lenses, which consist of ecological impacts, economic impacts, and social cultural impacts of climate change, and actively confront our implicit biases that we have. And all of this should hopefully equal actionable change. One thing that these teenagers experience living in Kennebunk, Maine, is that they're very insulated from the outside world, and they don't even necessarily understand why people inland don't care that much about sea level rise. So we talk about implicit bias.
Melissa, you've cut out. Your sound is cut out. No, I still can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Oh, now we can.
Okay. Can you change the slide? Thank you. So when you give students hope, they can make change. And so they created this incredible Slow the Rise campaign. They've learned how sea level rise and climate change is affecting their own backyard. You know, oftentimes we take where we live and where we grow up for granted, and that the things that we see every day are mundane. But when you look at it through through this lens of trying to make change, we bring it home to their backyard. They see how unique it is. They see the many ways that it's threatened by climate change. They learn to value it and they want to protect it. And so this is their attempt to create change and protect where they live. So Slow the Rise Maine is their baby. And we hope that you will stick around for this brief 3-minute student-made film.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing and reshare to make sure that we have the sound and video.
Welcome to one of Maine's oceanside communities, home to over 1,000 Maine families who have lived here for generations and want to stay. Home to a plethora of wildlife, a rich independent culture steeped in the maritime heritage, the best seafood, and breathtaking scenery, all contributing to our state motto, the way life should be. We want to live and raise our own families here and be an active member of our community. We want our families to experience washing the sand off your bodies in the cold ocean after a long day at the beach, wandering in Maine's wilderness and embracing the natural beauties that surround you, skiing down Sugarloaf, the cold air hitting your face. We are proud to be Mainers. But by the time we're ready to settle down and raise our families, we will be faced with challenges and changes to the state we love.
Basically, greenhouse gases create kind of a layer over the earth that can trap heat as it goes out. So some gases go up and they disintegrate right away. Greenhouse gases can kind of hang up there for like years or decades. And in the case of carbon dioxide, it kind of happens in about 30-year cycles. So the carbon we're emitting today, we will still be paying the price for 30 years from now.
Sea level is rising. If we do nothing to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions, seas will be 11 feet higher, meaning that today's high tide mark will be tomorrow's low tide mark. This isn't just an issue for coastal communities. This affects all Mainers. If we ignore this looming threat, it will not only cost the state of Maine millions, but the livelihoods of many Mainers will be lost, altering our identity as a state and people, as well as the landscape for future generations.
What concerns me is that, ultimately development and projects and homes for people, affordability is going to get expensive, to mitigate some of the issues with climate change, it's going to cost money.
The cost will fall to average hardworking Mainers who are least able to shoulder the expense. For many communities, coastal retreat and inland migration is the only option.
So now what? Is that it? Not exactly. People across Maine, the nation, and the globe are taking action. The time for change is now. Nothing is impossible. Together we can help make a difference. Together we can slow the rise here in the Gulf of Maine and around the world.
I just want to say one thing as a closing, that these students are leaving with hope, And I think for all of us in this work, the most important thing we can do is to try and build hope to fight this problem in our youth, because they don't feel hopeful right now. And that is something that Melissa works really hard and Pam works really hard with their students to really build a sense of empowerment so that they can take action and have some hope for their future. And that is KCI's entire goal, is to build youth networks for hope, for action, to move our country forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Leah and Melissa, and it's certainly true. We definitely need to be able to provide that, a sense of hope that, and I think the work that everyone is doing here, I hope you will convey that to them, that there are, like someone said earlier, there, I think it was Chris at the very beginning, there are not only hundreds, there are thousands of people working on this, and so they're not alone, and we do definitely need their energy and continued engagement, because like you say, we're not going to, someone else said earlier on, none of us are going to get there by ourselves. We have to do it together. So thank you very much, and thank the students for us too, very, very much. Okay, so let's see, I don't know if anyone has been following for questions, because I think we're about at that stage. If we have any questions, we are quite a bit over time. So I might suggest, and maybe we can take a show of hands or something, perhaps if there are questions, they can be directed directly to the organizations and the individuals who presented, and so that we kind of do need to wrap up, if that is okay. Does that sound reasonable to people?
I think there were two for Melissa.
Okay.
Early on. So Chris Ford asked, can anything be done about the oyster disease? And Lisa Pagano followed up by asking, and saltwater encroachment too. Melissa, are you still up to answer, or do you want to take that up later?
No, just super quickly, as far as disease, I think there's the disease came up from the mid-Atlantic, affected not just the Great Bay, but lots of oysters. And I think what's being done is that for all the commercial growers buy seed that's disease resistant. So there's only a few growers that produce seed, mostly up in the Damariscotta area. And those oysters are disease resistant up until about 3 or 4 years, after which point they're, and that's the marketable size is 2 to 3 years anyway. So that's what's being done. And so those oysters are spawning, in the water, and hopefully the native set that they produce will also have some resistance to these diseases.
And about saltwater encroachment, that question?
Oh, yes, saltwater encroachment. Yeah, that is part of the groundwater rise issue. Is it's coupled. Some of it is fresh water that's rising because of the hydrostatic pressure, and some is saltwater, intrusion as well. So those are both definitely concerns that we're seeing already in some of the coastal fringe areas.
Okay, well, thank you so much. So to wrap up, we have a short video that, if it weren't for the technical difficulties that we experienced a couple of weeks ago, it would have been included in the community resilience session. But I think in a way it's fortuitous that we have it now to conclude our series. I say this because, taken as a whole, the proactive efforts described by all of our presenters and on full display tonight, I must say this is incredibly impressive. It really does reflect the ongoing, multifaceted and resilient response to climate change. It's being demonstrated before our eyes here. So if you can cue up that last video, Allison.
Always concerned about the environment,
Whenever ecosystems were threatened or damaged by human activity, I pay attention. But I was rarely moved to actually do something about it until November of 2016, when extreme environmental threats really loomed large. The Planeteers have been therapeutic for me. These folks help me put my worries to work.
The Planeteers to me are kind of like this forest. It's like hope, collaboration, creativity, patience, and resilience because we keep evolving.
I too am a proud member of the Planeteers. I joined the group because I truly believe in the power of education. I believe that when people are informed, that can affect positive change because they become more empowered and feel more connected to not only their communities, but their natural world.
Working with the Planeteers leads to greater community resilience because the Planeteers are inclusive, they care about science, they care about the environment, and they care about the community. From projects seeking to inform people how to make hotels for insects, which helps our smallest creatures, to projects that hope to combat global climate change, the Planeteers are always seeking to make the community, both in Maine and globally, a better place. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Jen, and I'm a Planeteer because I am inspired by and love the camaraderie of working with my fellow community members in an effort to educate and collaborate with our neighbors in our shared commitment of preserving this beautiful earth. And it's just more fun this way. I'm always amazed at what we are able to accomplish together.
The Planeteers of Southern Maine are a fun group of people. Whenever I have the opportunity to engage with the Planeteers, I come out not only more informed but inspired. From monitoring beach erosion and debris to building bee motels, bird and bat houses, the Planeteers offer many opportunities for thoughtful and creative input.
When I first retired, I was delighted to attend the 2016 meeting when Planeteers first gathered as local compatriots in environmental efforts. Even though we have focused on diverse endeavors as individuals, we support each other in our active pursuits in the community and beyond.
The library has worked with the Planeteers on several educational programs over the last couple of years, from a seed bomb making project with the teens to a series about Maine's climate action plan. They bring their creativity, enthusiasm, knowledge, hard work, and passion for the environment to every project.
The Wells Reserve relies on the Planeteers to keep us abreast of state and local environmental issues and to always be ready to pitch in when the needs arise. And needs always arise. With this climate challenge, every effort helps.
Well, thank you, fellow Planeteers and partners. I'm reminded seeing St. Nick here at the end to mention that we do indeed accept donations, which are managed by our fiscal sponsor, the Laud Home Trust. Find out how on our website or Facebook page. As Grace so aptly says, we are indeed continuously evolving. So let us know, too, how you want to play into our effort. Yours truly, Andrea.
That's a wrap on our series. Thank you all for coming. And if you want to watch any of the previous episodes, sessions, they're on our YouTube channel. And this one will be going up in the next few days. Thank you, everybody.
Everyone, you're wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you all.